This is a very long journey. It's going to take decades, if not a century or more, to get to the point where we've rewilded so much that nature is truly taking care of itself at scale. And when you get to that point, you're no longer rewilding, you've rewilded. Here at Broughton, we have a landowner who wants to do the right thing. He talks about being a custodian of his land rather than the owner of his land. He wants to leave it in a fitter condition for future generations. And fit for the future is very much the strapline of rewilding. It's not about looking back to the past and trying to recreate some idyllic landscape from 1,000 years ago. It's about looking forward to create a landscape that's fit for the future, but taking account of the sorts of wildlife that we would expect to have had here historically, what belongs here.
The Broughton Sanctuary Nature Recovery Programme is a commitment to address one of our deepest contemporary crises, a lack of harmonious coexistence with the earth. Here at Broughton in North Yorkshire, approximately 1/3 of this centuries-old estate is being transformed into a much wilder estate, whilst retaining the most suitable fertile lands for traditional farming. Currently one of the biggest projects taking place in England and a contribution to the UK government's target to protect 30% of the country for nature by 2030.
So people often ask, why do we need rewilding? And having worked for over 40 years in conservation and worked on thousands of projects, nature reserves, restoring rivers, creating wetlands, all that sort of thing, I know there's been lots of amazing work done by thousands of people over decades. But the simple truth is we're still going backwards when it comes to biodiversity. It's still declining. We've got great data in this country that shows that. So we need something else as well. And that something else is rewilding, in my view. And there are people out there getting on and doing it. They're seeing the way the future of farming is going. The government is introducing a scheme based on public money for public goods. So farmers will be rewarded for managing their land in a much more sustainable way. And the basic payment scheme, which pays farmers based on the amount of land they've got for farming food, that is being phased out. So this new arrangement is coming in, and farmers are starting to see the writing on the wall, and especially those in very marginal areas where without subsidies they could not make a profit. Those landowners are already, from a financial point of view, realising that it's time to probably think of a different way and diversify. And there are landowners who want to do it because it's the right thing to do anyway.
I'm deeply moved by it. I really am, right in my heart. I think this is the way to go. It's good for everybody. It's good for humanity. It's so overdue. We've been so lost with how we've looked after the land. It's time for a reformation of the way we treat land and nature. And the problem is that our inner nature has created so many problems with outer nature, and it's time to recognise that. This is for future generations. We're not going to see these trees at their full beauty, but the biodiversity, can you hear that curlew now? At the moment you go up to the national park or something, you might see some sheep and some cattle. There's hardly anything else up there. You need real nature to come back to its home and allow it to be in its home rather than poisoning it. There's an environmental crisis. We have to do something about it. So we're actually delivering this on the ground. We've talked about it long enough. It's time to do something. So as you can see here, this is the biggest tree planting scheme in England. The benefits of the scheme are going to be huge. There's flood prevention in Leeds, there's the biodiversity, there's the lack of monoculture. We've only got 6% of woodland in Craven, 6%, and a lot of that's quite artificial or timber production. And the deforestation, we talk about Brazil and the Amazon and all these places, but what about on our home patch? We've been 95% deforested basically. So it's time for people like myself as a custodian of this particular land, it's time to do something about it.
Hilltop Farm is home to the 4th generation of the Heseltine family to farm in Malham. The Malhamdale landscape has led farmer Neil Heseltine to use traditional methods and has been farming his belted cattle breed for over 13 years as part of the conservation grazing scheme.
So I'm Neil Heseltine. I farm here at Hilltop Farm in Malham. And over the years we've made quite a few changes to how we farm. I think the two biggest issues facing global society at the moment is both climate change and nature recovery. And I think rewilding just plays a part within that recovery with regards to land management. So you may have rewilding, you may have lower intensity farming, you may have all sorts of different options, but rewilding is just one of those, and there's no doubt that that does deliver nature recovery and does capture more carbon than some of the sort of farming techniques we have at the moment. And as we go forward in terms of environmental land management, that actually might present itself as a business opportunity as well.
So now we're in a situation where large landowners particularly are looking at alternative ways of managing their land, and they all want to do it in a way that brings their tenants and their communities with them. That's great, and so they should. But it is difficult. This is going to require difficult conversations, because rewilding in an estate like this is going to mean quite a significant change in land management and farming types. If you look at this estate here, you know, this is a sheep-dominated landscape. The impact they have on grassland is very dramatic. You know, you can see how bowling green short a lot of these fields are. So removing or significantly reducing sheep numbers is a key part of it. But that's difficult because that then requires significant changes in farming practices. In this sort of landscape, you still need animals. You still need grazing animals to manage vegetation, but you need fewer of them and you need a more natural mix of them. So mixes, for example, of small numbers of rare breed cattle, maybe ponies, maybe in the valley bottoms and the woodlands pigs, but as close as you can get to the original native species in terms of their impact on the vegetation.
What we've found here is that we were going through that process at one time where we were trying to produce as much as we possibly could from the farm. Over the years we were sort of getting concerned about the environmental impact that we're having of the numbers of sheep and cattle we had on the farm. So we actually reduced the amount of livestock we had. And what we found is as we've pulled that back in and reined that back in and reduced the levels of production, we found they've actually become more profitable. And that's just because as you're reducing your levels of production, you can reduce the cost of production. And so actually we end up with a greater margin than we had previously. In terms of the biodiversity on the farm, that's improved as well. So we found that there's been quite a lot of benefits to actually reducing the levels of stock that we've had on the farm.
The sorts of changes that you'd see in a landscape like this through a rewilding initiative involve obviously removal or at least significant reduction of sheep, but particularly the introduction of more trees. This landscape probably has 5 to 7% woodland cover in this particular estate. You would probably aspire to at least probably trebling that amount of cover to get closer to a more naturalistic regime. And that means tree planting, yes. Ideally one would allow trees to naturally regenerate, to self-seed themselves, but that's extremely difficult in a landscape like this with relatively few trees and hedgerows and a very dense compacted grass sward which is difficult for tree seeds to get established in. So tree planting in this landscape is going to be essential.
Although we may feel there are a lot of trees around us compared to other parts of the world, the reality is that compared to the rest of Europe, we have a below average woodland cover, and North and West Yorkshire fall behind the rest of the UK. To combat this, the UK government has set a target of creating 30,000 hectares of woodland per year. Schemes such as Broughton are seen as essential if these ambitious targets are to be met.
When we're planting trees in a landscape like this, there's also the opportunity to help tackle flood risk. Planting trees strategically across slopes helps to slow the water flow across those slopes down into the river valleys. Now you might look at a field like this and think, oh, when it rains, the water just soaks in. But we've just walked across a piece of ground and we felt the squelching under our feet. And that's because after decades, if not hundreds of years of sheep grazing, that soil gets compacted just below the surface and the water does not soak in. It runs off the surface on steep slopes like this. It actually runs down the surface of the ground and therefore it gets to the river valley bottom much quicker than it would if it's percolating into the ground below, the rock below. So planting trees and disrupting the soil enables water to soak in into the ground much more. This infiltration, as it's called, is much more significant. So we're trying to integrate this work with natural flood management work that the Environment Agency are delivering through a programme to help reduce flood risk downstream in Leeds and Skipton, etc.
Ewan Downey is Project Manager for Haywoods and the White Rose Forest Project.
The reason White Rose Forest is really keen to support the project here at Broughton Hall, because it can deliver so significantly to local communities. It is in itself, we understand, if not the biggest, certainly one of the biggest projects happening in England this year. So it has a real star value to it, and we hope that it's something that we can use and develop and encourage other landowners across the region to come and have a look and learn from. Broughton Hall almost entirely sits within the target area for our landscapes for water, and the upper air is also a really important target area. So much so that actually of all the schemes in the White Rose Forest that we received interest in for planting in this planting season, it got the highest score. It is, as far as we're concerned, the #1 priority for us, and it will deliver more than other woodlands, though important, but we're certainly getting more bang for our buck here at Broughton.
In the distance you see the floodplain of the River Aire, which is the main river that drains down towards Leeds, and all the tributaries run off these hills into that river. We are now looking for opportunities to restore that floodplain to a healthy natural relationship with the river, so that when the river wants to flood, it can freely flood onto that land. And of course that brings many benefits in terms of bringing nutrients to that land, bringing seeds that help wildflowers, etc. to germinate.
Broughton Sanctuary is home to the Avalon Wellbeing Centre, a state-of-the-art space for personal transformation and the rebuilding of the bond between nature and humanity. Paris Acril, co-founder of Avalon, believes that by reconnecting these two elements, both humans and the natural world can truly flourish.
In order to survive and really thrive as a species, we need to find a more symbiotic relationship with the earth. I think over the last centuries and with modern living, there's been such a divide that's become ever more apparent between humans and nature. It's been so much about consumerism and extraction, and that only leaves us wanting more, and also leaves the earth in a more sorry state. And we've come so far from how our ancestors would have lived, in rhythm with the seasons, in rhythm with the moon cycles and with the rhythms of the day. And so I think it's important to come back and start to see those natural cycles again, to try and live with those cycles, live in awareness with those cycles. Because really modern life takes us so out of balance, and to find health and balance, we need to kind of work against what modern life is taking us away from, and try and come back to just an awareness of those natural daily rhythms of the cosmos that our ancestors would have been so connected to. And if you've had the opportunity to step foot in really ancient forests, there's some incredible ancient woodland in Slovenia or the Amazon rainforest, for example. The ecosystems there, they pulse with such vibrancy that it makes you feel so alive. It fills you up with so much energy. And I think one thing we started to realize just through being on our land and having this awareness and going to national parks and things and realizing the lack of biodiversity, that we've lost our wild spaces, our truly wild spaces. We've lost our wilderness. And so we need to try and recreate that in Britain. We need to find those spaces that really fill us with that sense of aliveness just through being there. So rewilding the spirit is really about remembering that we are one interconnected web of life, that we are part of nature, and nature is part of us.
Liz Dawes, the forest guru, connects people and nature daily as a forest therapy guide.
There are so many health benefits associated with spending time in nature. And one in particular relates to phytoncides. So phytoncides are these essential oils oils emitted by trees as a natural defence mechanism. The tree emits these essential oils when it's under attack by fungi or small insects or bacteria. But what these studies have found is that when humans inhale these phytoncides, there is a corresponding increase in our natural killer cells. So these are white blood cells that sweep our bodies to fight off cancer and other tumours. But really, when we think about it, this really makes quite a lot of sense because we evolved in nature. We evolved to live in harmony with nature. So it's about really appreciating what nature is giving to us. It's about acknowledging what nature is giving to us. And it's about asking ourselves, what is it that we can give in return? So when we realise that we are in this reciprocal relationship with nature, we begin to realise that we are part of this interconnected web of interbeing. As much as we depend on nature, nature is also depending on us. You know, our health depends on having a biodiverse environment in the way that we need healthy food to eat. We need clean water to drink. And having a biodiverse area really supports our own health. But for that biodiverse area to exist, we've got to recognise our part in supporting that biodiversity.
I just feel incredibly lucky to be part of a project that is making a difference. You know, it's making a difference to our health and to the health of the planet. The two go hand in hand, like you cannot have one without the other. You know, if you've got a sick planet, you've got sick people, and vice versa. And maybe more importantly, you know, if our attitude and our behaviour towards the earth is unhealthy, if our relationship is unhealthy, if we continue to take more than our fair share, then of course the earth is going to be unhealthy, and you know that's just a lose-lose situation. When we started the tree planting, we got so much interest from the local community. We organised some community planting days, and it was so nice to see people coming together of all ages, different backgrounds, and getting involved and enjoying it. You know, and we had children as young as 3 or 4 digging the soil, putting the trees in, and just really interested, asking questions I wouldn't even thought about at 4 years old. Why do we need trees? What is biodiversity? And you know, we need biodiversity for us to live on Earth. And you know, if that can be their mindset, the mindset of the next generation, then you know that's got to be a good thing.
So there are various ways that we can get trees back into the landscape, and Rewilding Broughton and others recommend a hierarchical approach. First of all, aim for natural regeneration. Then there's assisted regeneration, where we will probably plough or harrow the edges of fields so they'll look a bit like this, bare ground. That's assisted regeneration because we're doing something, we're intervening to kickstart the opportunity for seeds. And then, as I say, the third option is that we actually plant. And here we have had to do a lot of planting.
So at Broughton, as part of this woodland creation project, we're planting native broadleaves. We have a variety of trees going in. There's probably about 15 different species. So it ranges from hawthorn, blackthorn, willow, hazel, through to rowan, bird cherry, aspen, lime. So the ground preparation that we have to do on this site, given we've got a field that's currently grassland, it's been grazed by sheep, so there's quite a tight turf grass sward on top. So we need to expose the soil in order that we can get the trees directly into the soil to enable them to grow. So what we do here is we machine screef off the top of the turf, and we expose the soil so that we can plant the trees straight in, put the tube in contact with the soil, and then hopefully that will give us a weed-free establishment phase as well, probably the first 12 to 18 months. So on this site we've chose to individually protect each tree, and as you can see we're protecting them through plastic guards, but these guards will be taken off in probably years 5 to 10 dependent upon the growth of the trees, and the plastic will be recycled. In terms of tree spacing on the site, we're planting here at 1,600 trees to the hectare, which equates to about 2.5 metre centres. So the stocking density is a minimum that we have to abide by for the funding. They'll have different growth rates, and so their heights will be varying across the woodland. We'll be planting the high forest tree species effectively in the centre of the plantations, and the margins will be planted with the woody shrubs, so we then have a feathered effect across the plantation as a whole.
But we are lucky that we've got some areas, like this field that we're in here, which is an arable field, where we can allow natural regeneration, the preferred option. And essentially it's the seeds and nuts and fruits from trees and scrub around the edges of the field naturally dispersing into the field and germinating. And I'll just show you very crudely an example here with this ash tree. It's got loads of ash keys on it. You see, when the wind blows, these ash keys will discharge across the field, probably only 10-20 metres or so, but gradually over time more and more will appear further out in the field as those trees grow and have their own seeds. That's how natural regeneration works. Sometimes it's accelerated by birds like jays, for example, which will carry and bury acorns out in the fields, and squirrels that'll take fruit and nuts and also seeds in bird droppings. So there are all sorts of ways it can happen. And if you look at these seeds, these keys are basically the means of dispersal for the ash tree, so it enables it to, rather than just falling straight to the ground, it can blow in the wind some distance. And then within each of these keys is a small thin seed, which later this year will germinate, and we will see ash saplings growing in this area here later this year. So you see this conifer plantation behind me. This will be a place where we'd also be intervening to kickstart the rewilding process. These trees are non-native conifers, probably planted for timber harvesting, and what we're going to be doing is removing them in stages. We wouldn't want to do it all in one go because that would have a bit of an impact on the landscape, but if we do it over a period of years, we can replace those conifers with native trees. And what we'll probably do, because there are some native trees in the far corner of the plantation, that's a place where we won't plant trees to start with. We'll clear the conifers and allow natural regeneration, natural seeding from those trees to start with, to see how that goes. And if that works, we'll follow the same pattern for the rest of the plantation.
With the planting of new trees and the rewilding of farmlands, will this impact on food production?
It's an interesting question because obviously rewilding is an emotive subject at the moment, and I think what's happened down at Broughton Hall is some of the land and some of the less used land and some of the less productive land is areas of land that have gone into rewilding, as we call it, and then the other is still being farmed and still being productive. So probably what Roger's doing there is just creating quite a nice balance between the food production on one hand and the nature recovery on the other. I think there are sort of projections to suggest that we'll need more food as we go forward, but there are also suggestions that we're already globally producing enough food to feed the projected 11 billion people that we're going to have. I think there's other things that we can work on as solutions to that, i.e. food waste and the amount that we eat, particularly as Western civilizations, and try and solve those problems before we necessarily worry too much about the levels of food that we produce.
When people think about biodiversity, they think about it just in terms of maybe, more wild spaces and wildlife, but actually biodiversity is also really important in farming and our farming practices. And we've become sort of more and more tunnel vision, I guess, monoculture and things. Our ancestors, hundreds of years ago, we would have eaten maybe hundreds of different types of vegetables and plants and things. And now I think we eat mainly 30 different types of vegetables. And it's actually very dangerous, I think, when you rely so heavily on particular species. And so hopefully through the work that we do here, through changing some of the farming practices and through like our foraging woodland and doing more work in collecting food and showing people how you can collect food off the land, will be a really beautiful thing to help people to realise that we don't have to rely so heavily on particular species and that actually our health and the health of the land can grow together.
So rewilding has many benefits in terms of what we call ecosystem services. One of those is carbon sequestration. So if you look in the middle distance, you'll see some superb woodlands down in the valley bottom. And those trees will be drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it and locking it up. And that is helping to mitigate the impacts of climate change, climate warming. Now, it'll take a while, of course, for these trees to get to the stage where they are storing as much carbon as those down in the valley bottom. But nevertheless, evidence has shown that within a few years, young trees and shrubs will start storing carbon. It's also important to remember that grasslands will sequester carbon, but it depends on the condition of those grasslands. An intensively grazed grassland, like the sheep pastures you see close to the woodland down in the valley bottom, they are very poor at storing carbon. Rougher, wildflower-rich grasslands that are not intensively grazed are much better. Now, what we're going to get here is not only will the trees be storing carbon, but so will the rough grassland that develops in and amongst those trees and around these field edges where we're not doing any planting. And then on the moorland, again, through re-wetting the moorland and encouraging it to develop a greater mix of shrubby vegetation, again, that moorland area is going to sequester more carbon. So all in all, this project is contributing in a big way to mitigating climate change.
The whole nature recovery, you know, some people regard it as controversial, others it's so obvious to them. There are other people who feel a bit defensive about it. But you know what, I think everybody's going to come together on this. They're going to realise nature's nature. Let it do its own thing. It's part, we've got to coexist with it. You know, and farming can easily coexist with it. Yes, it's got to be responsible farming. There's just a balance which is coming out of all this environmental crisis, and there's room for everybody in it. Like here, we'll do our tree planting and farming will go alongside it. Who knows, they might be producing I don't know, mushrooms on it which produce massive healing for antidepressant and menopause and all these sort of things. There might be all sorts of new ideas come out of this nature recovery, you know, program beyond just producing beef or sheep through grass. And how we live our lives, our psychological health, you know, we need nature. This mass urbanization, you know, the last 150 years, you know, it needs to be an antidote to it in a way. You know, we're the lungs of Britain, the countryside. So myself as a caretaker of land, I'd like people to come away from Broughton and what with this sanctuary here, what we're doing, and thinking, yeah, that's an amazing place, good for, you know, it's a force for good for everybody.